And typically what happens when people are approaching a time of great change, they tend to get kind of defensive about it. And so they're a little reluctant. They try to preserve what they've got. They don't want to give up anything and hang on to it, cling to it maybe. And they're a little reluctant to take risks. And that's a bad approach, because you create an opportunity for somebody else then to come in. What I thought I would do today is share with you some of my perspectives about what's happening in commercial broadcasting. Now, I realize that may seem a little bit offbeat for you, since you're not really affected by what's happening in commercial broadcasting, but you are, because as the larger ecosystem of television changes, it begins to change the expectation that your consumers, your audiences have. And so therefore, PBS needs to be aware, the PBS stations need to be aware of the changes in commercial broadcasting. So my thinking is that this is a time for leadership, and that's why I've used this title today, Leadership in a Time of Turmoil, because that really is what's happening. I'm going to begin with a cliche. This is kind of like breaking your public speaking rule. Never start with a cliche, but I want to talk about the information age. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, information age. We've been hearing about that for 40 years. We really have, right? The information age. It doesn't really seem like an urgent topic, but it is. Because really, we've just been laying foundation for the past 40 years. And it truly has been that long of a time. The internet just crossed a major milestone. It's 45 years old as of last year. And the personal computer this year will be 40 years old. It's hard to believe it. Apple Computer, 40-year-old company. Two guys named Steve put together the first personal computer. And a guy named Bill Gates wrote his first software for the personal computer in 1975. So we've had personal computers for 40 years. And even the World Wide Web, which seems like such a new thing, is actually just celebrated its 25th anniversary. So this stuff has been around for a while, and in some respects, we think of it as kind of a thing that's been out there that we know, we understand what it is, and it's sort of different from what we do. We've been conditioned to think that way for quite some time. What's interesting about the internet economy, the economy that springs from all these connected devices, is that it's actually kind of small percentage of our total economy. So you hear about the internet businesses all the time. They generate a lot of news. They generate a lot of sensation in the press. But recently, the Boston Consulting Group did some analysis of the gross domestic product of the G20 countries. And they tried to calculate how big was the internet economy as a percentage of that total GDP. And what they arrived at was a sort of startling conclusion. In no country in the G20 is the internet economy more than 10% today. Now, China, it looks like, is going to exceed that, and the UK will exceed it next year. At some point, they'll break through, and it'll be about 12% of their economy. But even there, it's a relatively small percentage of the economy. The United States is very close to the average, the median of that G20 group, at about 5% of our total economy. So it's a tiny portion. But I thought, well, wait a minute, what can I compare that to that'll really put this into sharp perspective? So I took a subset of these countries: China, US, India, Canada, Brazil, Italy, Russia, Turkey. It seems like an odd collection, a motley crew. Why did I pick these countries? Because I had some other data that I wanted to flow in. What I'm going to show you is how this internet economy as a percentage of GDP lays up against the shadow economy, the untaxed black market economy in these countries. And yes, we do have an untaxed black market economy in the United States. That's people paying for household help. That's people paying for gardeners and landscapers and so forth. In some countries, it approaches about a third or even more of the total economy. That's really quite extraordinary. So you can see that that internet economy as a percentage of GDP is relatively small to even something like the underground economy. That's quite an extraordinary thought, particularly when you consider how much turmoil has been wreaked on various industries, even though the internet is still such a small thing, such a small percentage of the total picture. So during the past decade, we've seen these industries totally transformed. Both the print book publishing, magazines and newspapers, music, games. These industries have been totally transformed, and along with it, advertising as well. Even industries like the map publishing business. Think about maps. Remember buying maps? It's a thing we used to do not too long ago, right? There were companies like Falk Publishing and Rand McNally where you would actually go out and buy a paper map. And if you think about that now with your smartphone in hand, you just never need to do that. It's a habit we've lost. We never get lost anymore. We're never lost because you pop up on the map on your phone. It tells you exactly where you are. You don't have to turn the map and try to relate it to some street sign in a foreign language. The map tells you exactly where you are. So what's happening is we're kind of replacing these things that we grew up with, things that were tried and true, that we knew very, very well. They don't go away. Those companies still exist, but they become fairly irrelevant because consumers move on to this new device, this new experience, and they just don't need to go buy a map from Rand McNally or Falk Publishing anymore. That's a really big challenge. It's not just happening to media. It's not limited to these publishing businesses. It's also happening to devices that we all grew up with and we're using. I call this vaporizing because we're literally turning hardware into a piece of software that you can download through the air, over the air. In 2002, a BlackBerry RIM pager was considered one of the early smartphones. It was smart because it took the functionality of 4 different things: your email, your telephone, your day runner. Remember those day runners everybody used to run around with in the 90s, those big fat books that were stuffed full of addresses and stuff? They got vaporized, right? Got turned into a piece of software on a phone. So that's what made the BlackBerry a smartphone. Just 8 years later, by 2010, a standard issue Samsung smartphone comprised more than 30 different consumer electronics devices. It had absorbed the functionality of 30 different consumer electronics devices and made them unnecessary. You didn't have to lug around a camera or a video recorder or a DVD player or a handheld game player or a GPS device. All those things became suddenly irrelevant to us, and we simply stopped buying them. We didn't need to carry them and the batteries that go with them and the replacement batteries and the charger kit and all that stuff. If you think about it, there was a time in the early, around 2000, where when you went on a trip, one suitcase was full of electronics and all the chargers and cables that you needed. Now you don't need that. Now you just take your smartphone with you. And so we've become accustomed to that, and we simply got out of the habit of purchasing these old electronic devices. And there's been a real big impact from that. If you paid attention to Sony, where I used to work, or Panasonic, Matsushita, Sharp, these Japanese electronics giants that were so impressive in the 1980s and so put fear into people in the United States because they were coming after our electronics businesses back in the 1980s. Now they are a shadow of their former selves. For the past 8 years, they've seen double-digit decreases in the sales of every type of consumer electronics. Sony, my alma mater, is in the process of dismembering itself. It's actually getting out of the electronics business now, if you can imagine that. But that's because the sales have been dropped so low. We simply don't have the habit of purchasing those things. This process is not stopping. It's going to continue. Right now, this year, your mobile phone is in the process of absorbing the functionality of your credit card, your identity, many other aspects of what's in your wallet, your access cards, those key cards that you use to get in and out of buildings. A lot of that will be replaced by NFC and similar technologies. You probably have Apple Pay on your iPhone if you have the new iPhone. You'll start to see that accepted at more and more stores. And gradually, we'll get out of the habit of carrying credit cards as well. I know it sounds crazy today, but it's clearly on its way. It's clearly happening now. So this process doesn't stop. The mobile phone, the digital device, is going to continue to absorb the functionality and with it the economics of all of those other businesses. So the way I like to think of this is whatever can be connected to the internet will be. And there's some really big meaning there. You've probably heard of the Internet of Things. If you haven't heard about it, the Internet of Things is the idea that we're going to have so many connected devices in the future that they will talk to each other, so that the thermostat in your home will talk to the smoke detectors, and if there's a fire in your house, smoke detector will tell your AC system to shut off so there's no air blowing around, increasing that fire. Your garage door opener will know when your car leaves the house, and so when you come back, it'll alert it, light up, the house lights will light up, and so forth. So that's the idea of the smart home. It's actually quite an amazing vision. We believe that in the very near future, we're going to have computers that we can wear. They might be in the form of glasses or a wrist brace or some sort of tattoo or something that's projected on your arm. And these carried with us, these projected or worn devices, well, they'll connect to the smart appliances like thermometers and heating systems, these plug-in devices, little dongles that you can plug into an old device like a TV and make it smart. This is a camera that actually has the smartphone capabilities of Android built into it. So instead of a phone absorbing the camera, this is a camera that absorbed the phone. We're even going to have these cool wearable things. These are out now in the market. If you're a skateboarder or a surfer or a snowboarder, you can strap on this wrist computer and it'll control a drone helicopter with a camera on it so that it can follow you and track you as you go down the hill doing tricks and shoot exactly the right shots. So we're starting to have these devices that follow us and connect to us and respond to us. If you've been to the great city of Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born, yeah, right on, thank you. There's always one. There's always one. In Cleveland, they have a great art museum, and they spent the last 5 years rebuilding it, and it's amazing now. So it's like a world-class art museum. And one of the great exhibitions there is in the main hall. There's a wall-sized computer. Think of like a gigantic iPad that's an entire wall, and you see kids playing with it all day long because they can sort through the entire collection, and it has the physics worked out so you can swipe and all the different paintings move across, and then you can stop on one and everything swirls around that, and you can zoom in and so forth. So it's really fun to see young kids play with this and experience it in a way where the computer is larger than you. And it raises a really interesting question about the future of our schools. What are we going to do in schools in the future when the knowledge is in the walls around us, the knowledge surrounds us? So you start to get a glimpse of what that future world might look like. Amazon is turning entire buildings like this warehouse into robot-driven, basically gigantic computers. You've heard, of course, about the robot vehicles, and apparently now Tesla is telling us that we're going to have the first autonomous vehicles on the road in a matter of months, kind of an aggressive prediction, but it is true. Every automotive company, in response to Google's initiative, now has an autonomous self-driving vehicle program in the way. So you can think of your car as a giant computer. Already, the typical car has more computer processing power than the entire NASA space program had in 1969. So your car is already kind of a mobile computing platform. Apple, Google, and all the other internet companies are focused on this. They're all striking deals with car companies now to extend the functionality of the phone into the car. So we now see the car as the next big mobile computing platform. Those cars will be driving around in streets that are also smart. There'll be sensor networks built into the roads. And so the cities will start to have total awareness. It's in a way you can think of the city waking up, and it'll start to become aware of itself, and it'll start to talk to itself. And so when they're installing LED lights, as they are in many cities across the country, those LED lights can also have a Wi-Fi hotspot built into them, because there's a transformer that's built into those LED lights. So that means you can now have every light on a street communicating, talking, gathering. Of course, they can use that mask to hang other types of information systems off of, so that the whole city now can start to be intelligent and aware. And so you start to see the city itself becoming a giant computing platform. That's the world we're moving into. And the way we're going to connect with this most likely is through our phone, because still that's the greatest computing power that we have with us at all times. It's got the greatest battery life of any of our devices. It's where all of our stuff is. It's already personalized to us. It's packed full of sensors, so it's quite an intelligent, responsive device. It's aware of what's around it. And so your phone will start to be the key to the Internet of Things as we move into that field. So there's a vision of some great, exciting change. And frankly, every manufacturing company that makes these kinds of products quite excited about this, because they see a growth market, a growth opportunity ahead. And so that's why they think it's the biggest opportunity in the world. Let me show you two charts. This is kind of interesting stuff. So here is the most conservative chart that I could find to project out what the Internet of Things might look like. By 2018, Business Intelligence says that IoT is going to have about 9 billion connected devices in the world, but that's the most conservative estimate. Cisco says that we're already at the brink of 50 billion connected devices. They expect by the end of the decade there'll be 50 billion devices communicating with each other, which means that the amount of communication that happens between people on the internet will actually start to become a dwindling percentage, because there'll be ever more and more devices talking to each other, generating ever more data. Here's another way to look at it. This is a chart that puts the Internet of Things in perspective with all the other smart devices that we have. So wearables, that's that purple line, that very small, vanishingly tiny purple line up at the top. Smart TVs is that bright green line. And then that big blue line there, that big blue line, that's the Internet of Things. You can see how that's going to grow by the end of the decade to be bigger than the personal computer business, the tablets and smartphones combined. So those are projections about the growth of the Internet of Things. Huge changes afoot. And we can rightly state that the information economy is reshaping the world that we know. It's going to turn devices that used to live by themselves, you plug them in and kind of forget about them. It's going to turn them into smart things that can communicate. We're going to be able to extract data from that that'll help us optimize energy use. It'll help us optimize the rest of the systems that are surrounding us. It'll start to make us aware of patterns in our behavior that we're not even aware of right now. So we're moving into a very interesting time of great change. And this is all happening right now. So in the next 5 years, we're all going to live through this. Exciting time. And what I would say about digital media is that the rate of change is accelerating in the digital world. You know that every day, because there's new apps, there's new services. It's almost impossible to keep up with all the new stuff that's happening. But in the last 10 years, the TV industry hasn't really done anything to innovate. If you think of the really big innovations in television, the DVR, the DVD, video on demand, these things are all more than 10 years old. These are all technologies that come from the 1990s. And the recent innovations, well, 3D TV, that didn't work out so well for the TV industry. So TV has kind of lost its ability to innovate. It's been so well protected that we got a little bit complacent about the internet. And this is the thing I try to alert my clients in the broadcasting business about. I try to wake them up to the fact that they've become complacent. So I was visiting friends at Turner Broadcasting this week. And whenever you go to Turner, you hear stories about Ted Turner. Ted Turner, great visionary, a huge hero of mine. I love the guy, but he was also super inappropriate, and in ways that's what makes him so charming. He just said whatever popped into his head, and he was kind of the master of the inappropriate military metaphor. And so I'm going to channel Ted Turner now and make a completely inappropriate left turn and make a military metaphor. What you're looking at here is the Maginot Line. Everyone familiar with the Maginot Line? So after World War I, the French said, gee, we don't really want to fight a battle like that anymore. That was no fun. And so in the 1920s and 30s, they devoted their entire military budget to pouring concrete foundations into the ground. And they built what they claimed at the time was the world's greatest underground fortification, this Maginot Line. And what they did is they built it all the way along the German border. So as you can see, here's France, there's Germany. And that dark red line is the Maginot Line. It's actually quite extraordinary. It's like they built this giant concrete bunker underground with all these turrets and guns and so forth. It was quite a luxurious place too. It wasn't like an Osama bin Laden cave. They had like underground dining facilities and gyms and places to sleep and so forth. So it was quite comfortable. They got a little bit cozy in their fortress. Maybe you're starting to see an analogy here that I'm making about the TV industry. They were so well fortified that they kind of settled down behind their bunker walls. Of course, we all know what happened. In 1939, the Germans said, gee, that's going to be a pretty tough obstacle to get through. Let's just drive around it. So the German tanks went through Belgium. Of course, the French were horrified. You just violated the neutrality of those countries. The Germans were like, yes, so. They weren't really looking for permission at that point. And so in 6 weeks, the Germans managed to dethrone the French. It was really quite an extraordinary move. What the French missed, of course, was mobility. Mobility changes everything. You mustn't settle down in your bunker. The Germans didn't spend their time pouring concrete. The Germans spent their small military budget perfecting mobile technologies. In 1939, mobile technology was a tank. Okay, that's the end of my inappropriate military metaphor, but I think you're getting the point that I'm trying to make. Maybe I'm not being very artful in this, but that 1939 tank that so shocked the French, today, mobility is a smartphone. And you really need to wake up and be alive to the fact that consumer behavior is changing rapidly because of the smartphone. The smartphone has moved to become our central point of contact with the internet. We reference it 150 times a day. We carry it with us all the time. Most people who use it never stop using it until they fall asleep at night. Mobile is the only media format that is growing in daily consumption, and that includes the internet on computers, by the way. The internet on a computer, the World Wide Web on a computer, on a desktop computer, wasn't just the fastest growing medium, it's also the fastest medium to decline as well. So actually we're starting to see a decline in page views on the internet, and that's because mobile is simply stealing that audience. They're stealing attention from every device. Last year, mobile crossed an important threshold. I was tracking this for a long time because I figured it was going to come eventually. Last year it happened. We now spend more minutes a day on our mobile phones than we spend watching television. That's a wake-up call for this industry. It doesn't monetize the same way. Of course, it doesn't monetize as well as television does. But you know that the ad dollars follow consumer behavior, and that's exactly what we're starting to see. So the forecast for advertising revenue growth is that all the growth is going to be in mobile. It makes too much sense, right? You know this from your own behavior, and if you don't have the habit, just check out your kids and see where they spend all their time. Ask them which one device they couldn't possibly live with. It won't be the TV set, I'm sorry to say. So that's important. I know you may be thinking, well, why is this guy telling me about advertising dollars? It's a good question. It's a fair point. The economics of TV are a reflection of consumer behavior. It's the only really accurate way I have of telling you a prediction about where things are going next. And I can tell you with some certainty that advertisers are paying all kinds of attention to mobile right now because that's where they see consumers spending increasing amount of times. You need to do the same. You need to pay attention to it. So even though the concerns of advertisers are not your concerns, you do care about where that audience is going. They're going to mobile devices. Every year now, we sell 1 billion new smartphones. 1 billion. There's no industry on earth that sells complex devices at that scale. And we're going to continue to do that. Today, there are about 4 billion people who have a mobile phone, and half of them, 2 billion, have a smartphone. That number is going to increase by about 500 million each year until the end of the decade, when they estimate that 5 billion people on Earth will have a smartphone. And it will become the most dominant medium by that point. It's only 5 years away. So today, when you look at a map of who's connected to the internet, what you see is the developed countries, the big cities, the coastal communities, and so forth. And you see there's a lot of room for growth. Those people aren't going to be buying flat screen TVs. They're certainly not going to buy landline telephones. They're going to be starting their internet experience with a smartphone in their hands. The really smart, disruptive companies on the internet are quite aware of this, led by Netflix, which, by the way, a big Wall Street investment firm just issued a buy order on because they've now designated them the winners in the OTT sweepstakes. That might be premature. I'll show you in a minute why I think that might be premature. Netflix realized many years ago that they needed to be present on devices. 5 years ago, they were already optimizing for 800 devices. That means that when you bought a device, there was already Netflix software built in. That's a very tough thing to dislodge. So now everybody else is trying to pile in, Amazon, Google, and so forth. They're going to have to dislodge that Netflix icon. That's not an easy thing to do. So that gave them tremendous footprint. And soon enough, device makers started to come to Netflix and work with them at an early stage to ensure that that service was available because consumers demanded it. And of course, you all have Netflix, so you know what a great experience it is to watch it on TV, and then you go somewhere else and you can pick up the exact same show right where you left off on your tablet, and then you can leave that and go to your mobile phone and pick up the exact same show right where you left it as you graze from device to device. So it's content that spans across all different devices. They're device agnostic, and they've grown tremendously fast. Back in 2011, Whitney Tilson is a big investor in Wall Street, a big short guy. He's an expert in shorting companies, shorted Netflix. And the CEO of Netflix sent him a letter and said, please don't do that. You're going to lose an awful lot of money. Turned out that Reed Hastings was right. Netflix has gone from strength to strength. And they now, last year, they breached the 50 million subscriber mark, making them the largest distributor of subscription video on the planet Earth. So they are a very important player in the space, but they're not the most important player, and they're not the biggest player. Google is an extraordinary company. We know them as the largest search company. And you probably know that they're not just the #1 search engine. Do you know who the #2 search engine is? It's not Microsoft. It's not Bing. It's YouTube, exactly. So if people go searching for video, they don't go to Google, they go to YouTube and they search it there. If they can't find it there, they just figure it doesn't exist and they move on to something else. It's a real problem. If your content's not on YouTube, you don't exist for those millions and millions of people who have that habit. They're not just the biggest search engine, they're also the biggest by far. They utterly dominate the advertising business on digital platforms. They have the largest ad networks, the largest ad server, the largest ad exchange, and the largest demand-side platform. And they're starting now to require people in that demand-side platform to plug into their ad exchange. So they're starting to bind these devices, these systems together, and they're further entrenching themselves. So Google is a dominant player, not just in search, but also in advertising. And let's not forget, Android is the largest operating system on Earth. All those internet-connected devices I just showed you, most of them are going to be running the Android operating system. Android is about 80% of the devices on the planet right now. So they did that in less than 10 years. They completely vanquished Microsoft. They completely displaced them. They completely made Linux a geek's toy, and they've dominated the system, and they're poised to grow Android for a long time to come. So Google has tremendous strength, and now they're moving into telecom. They've been quietly buying up dark fiber around the world for more than a decade, and they've been positioning their data farms close to those connection points so that they can distribute data very swiftly. So that's part of they've been managing their own backbone and their own network, but that's not all. They're launching fiber, you know this, some folks in Kansas City are very keenly aware of this. You can get, you have it here in Nashville, yeah, it's coming. Okay, great. So this is an amazing service. For about what you'd pay, at least what I pay for Time Warner Cable, I could get 100 times the service from Google. They're clearly trying to shame Time Warner Cable into upping their game and improving their product. So that's Google Fiber. Outside the United States, they're doing some radical experiments. This is Project Loon. You've heard about it. It's a balloon Wi-Fi service. They're trying to give people connectivity by hanging balloons in the stratosphere. This is a project where it's one of their Google X kind of moonshot projects, you know, where Google tries to come up with outrageous ideas. And the mandate here was, this is a funny idea, find a way to kill it so we can stop thinking about it and go focus on something more productive. So for 2 years, the team that was working on it tried to find a flaw. And eventually they came back to Sergey Brin and they said, we can't find a flaw. I guess this thing has to go. And they're like, okay, well, we have to turn it into a business. They now have perfected these balloons. They're Mylar balloons that fly at very high height, stratosphere. They can stay aloft for more than 6 months. They're robotic. They manage themselves so they can find the current. They will just rise or fall to find the right jet stream and get in the right trajectory. And they're now flying them. They launched them in New Zealand, and then they cross the Pacific, and they end up in Latin America. And the idea here is to bring connectivity to those dark spots on the map, particularly in the southern hemisphere. So that's Project Loon. But it doesn't stop there. Google quietly bought a company called Titan Aerospace, which is a drone manufacturer. I know. They have their own Air Force. Yeah. They make these solar-powered drones that can stay aloft for a long time. And the idea for Titan Aerospace is to bring connectivity to places quickly. So imagine if there's a big hurricane and a city like New Orleans goes underwater and people are cut off, but they need connectivity. We're so dependent on the internet now for all these services, you need that connectivity quite quickly. Well, Google can now send a whole fleet of Titan drones over and give you connectivity from the sky instantly. Like within a day, they could restore internet service. That's quite an extraordinary idea. That's not all. Did you know they also have their own space fleet? Yeah, so they bought Skybox, which is a fleet of small satellites. Now, these are for photography purposes. So they decided they didn't want to rely on satellite photography for their mapping services, so they decided to put their own satellites up in space. But I guess the point here is Google has really no limit on their ambitions. I guess that's the takeaway you can get from this section. Nothing is stopping them. They think of a crazy idea, and then if they can't find a way to kill it, they're like, well, I guess that's a business we should be in because nobody else is there. So just 2 weeks ago at the GSM World Congress in Spain, the big mobile phone gathering each year, Google arrived, and they sent a cold chill down the spine of every mobile operator because they announced that they're going to launch their own mobile service, and they're going to use their formidable software, their artificial intelligence services, to find the best signal so that they'll dynamically switch you in the United States from T-Mobile to Sprint to Wi-Fi and back again, and then they can always fill in with all these other toys that I just showed you so that they're going to argue they can give you the smartest network that's out there for your mobile service. This has got to cause a little consternation at AT&T and Verizon right now. So Google has announced Android TV. It's not just a new version of Google TV. I think this is actually a big new initiative for them. And that's not all. Of course, we also know they have YouTube. Half the video on the internet is served by YouTube. Every year there's speculation that someone's going to displace or supplant YouTube. And of course, it's fiction. That's just pure speculation. The reason that speculation keeps coming back, though, is that it's seen now as a necessity for every major internet company to provide some kind of video service. And so sure enough, here's Facebook. And Facebook is coming on strong this year. They're going after the upfront. They're going out to advertisers. They have a very, very, very compelling pitch about their ability to target. And they actually have some interesting statistics as well. So one thing they announced is a partnership with Nielsen. So they recognize that kind of the gold standard for measurement in television is Nielsen. I mean, gold standard. It's what everybody agrees to use. It's the least bad system that's out there for measuring audiences. And so from the advertising standpoint, it's a lot easier to work with Nielsen than to try to create your own metric, which is what all the internet companies have been doing. So Facebook's smart. They just said, we'll partner with Nielsen and measure it the same way. And so now it's extremely easy for a media planner to add a little Facebook into the media buy. Very smart move. Good move for these guys, too. It allows Nielsen to have at least some modicum of relevance in the digital era. And sorry, Nielsen. And this stat just came out yesterday. This is actually pretty interesting. So here are videos uploaded with more than 1 million views. As you can see, Facebook's able to calibrate how they promote video inside of their network so that they can kind of kick videos up. And that's a service they're going to start to offer advertisers as well. So when somebody launches a video on YouTube, they really have no control over whether it goes viral. You have to do a whole bunch of work to generate viral support for your video, viral breakout. On Facebook, you could plan it. You could actually buy it. That's pretty powerful control. So that's how Facebook's coming into the market. And then there's Apple. So Apple's had Apple TV for a while. It's been kicking around. They joked. They said it was a hobby and so forth. But we always knew Apple had some ambition in the TV arena. And now they've announced that they're going to be rolling out a service in September. If you're thinking about buying one of these OTT devices, I'd urge you to wait a little while and just see what Apple has, because it's probably going to be pretty doggone good. They've announced deals with just about every major media company with the exception of NBC. Comcast doesn't love this so much because Comcast is trying to push their Infinity box, and so they view this as a conflict, so they're holding back. Don't worry, NBC will be there eventually. This is going to be unavoidable. I was talking to some people in Los Angeles where I live this weekend, and apparently Apple is striking deals with filmmakers all over the place. So they're going to come out with kind of a version of cable TV. It'll cost about 30 or 40 bucks a month with support from all the big cable channel providers. They have most of the big broadcast networks, and they're also going to have their own kind of Netflix-style service as well with their original programming. So I think that's going to be a really powerful offering coming into the fray. And don't forget, Apple's going to do one thing that everybody else can't do, which is they're going to bring apps. The apps on your mobile phone, we've been conditioned this, right? 1 million apps on our phone. Every day there's new apps. And you kind of, when you find one that really works for you, you get in the habit real quickly of using that app to the exclusion of all others, including your friends. You just kind of like get addicted to it, right? Well, now they're going to bring apps to the Apple TV. That's going to transform the way TV works. You can imagine making your own playlists that you can share with your friends. There's a million ideas that come to mind when you think of the creativity and the huge app developer network Apple has. So you're going to start to see tremendous change happening in TV. And that's bad news if you're a cable channel, because it means that your channel is just another app on somebody else's device. You no longer have pride of place. That cable TV ecosystem, that Maginot line that I was just describing, what's happening is we're just routing innovation around it. It's just going to bypass it completely and come to people in all these new ways from all these new providers who have nothing to lose. They are not in any way committed to the old model. They don't care about legacy systems. They don't have any legacy deals to care about. They don't have to preserve those old economics, and they're simply going to migrate everybody over to these new platforms while companies like Comcast try to continue to control through proprietary systems and proprietary boxes, keep their audience locked in and so forth. What we'll start to see is that free version, that open version, that rapidly innovative version that's available on the internet is going to start to attract more and more and more people as time goes on. We're also starting to see competition come from some unlikely sources, magazines and newspapers. They have nothing to lose. The print business is finished. The newspaper business is over, so why not get into the video game? So suddenly now companies like CNN have to fend off a threat from companies they never really considered competition in the past. And on our mobile devices, we're also being trained to expect to use video in new ways. So this is something that television never taught us. TV had one lesson for us. It was to sit down and watch. That was your job. Sit there and watch. The mobile device teaches you that you can play with video, you can record it, you can edit it, you can produce it, you can distribute it, you can share it. Many people at once can contribute to a video. And there's endless amounts of innovation happening here. One that you probably have heard about now, Meerkat. It's only a month old. They just raised $10 million today. This is the app that stole South by Southwest. There's always one app that breaks out at South by Southwest, and it was Meerkat. And so you have people broadcasting live video from their mobile phones instantly. They use Twitter to kind of tune in and find those people. Very powerful new thing. If you haven't checked out Meerkat, you must get into it. Live video is going to be a big deal. So the internet guys, they look at this and they say, great. This is the internet's opportunity, finally, to oust TV. TV's done a great job of protecting itself. It had a very good Maginot line built, but finally we found a way to route around it, and we're now going to steal the video business entirely. That's the view from the internet companies. Why you need to care about this and the fate of commercial TV is that the behavior of those consumer habits are going to affect you. Even though you're immune to some extent from the economics of commercial television, and you certainly don't need to care that much about how advertising works in TV, you do need to care about what your audience is doing. You need to care about that very, very much. Americans are moving away from TV, traditional TV, faster than ever. So TV must evolve. Commercial TV understands that now. They're, in some respects, desperately trying to remain relevant. They're innovating like mad, and you need to innovate as well. So what I want to do is equip everybody in this room to be a champion. You've spent the last 2 days in workshops. You've spent the last 2 days thinking about the questions of innovation. Now you need to bring that information back to your station, back to the rest of the people who couldn't come here, couldn't be with you. And you need to be the champion for innovation in your company. So there's a gigantic erosion of trust that's occurring right now on these internet platforms. Fewer people trust Facebook than the United States government, and that's a year and a half after all those Snowden revelations revealed that they're tracking every single thing that you do. We still trust the US government more than Facebook. But even Google, look at Google. It's impossible to use the web and not use Google in some fashion, and half the people, more than half the people, do not trust Facebook. So there's a crisis on our hands. It's not a data crisis. This is a leadership crisis. These are companies that are making decisions to be expedient. And they're stealing data from people. They're taking advantage of their customers. Always a bad idea to take advantage of your customers. Eventually, your customer is going to wake up and be aware, and they're going to be sore about it. They're going to be really, really cross. And I think we're getting to a point where people now are starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this. So we have a need for a new kind of leadership. We need leadership in a digital era to rebuild the public trust, because public trust has been eroded greatly. So even as we see television moving to these new internet platforms, these new digital platforms, what we're soon going to find is that there was a reservoir of trust. Even for the crappiest reality TV show, there was a sense of, I trust this company because it's a straight-up proposition. I pay my cable bill each month, and I get interrupted with a few ads, but that's okay because I get to watch this great, crappy, low-down trailer trash TV show, and I'm okay with that bargain. I struck that bargain. Now we're going to move over to the internet. It's going to be like, I get that great experience, and there may very well be ads on it, but there's also going to be data mining. Hey, I never signed up for that. I never signed up for a television that spies on me when I'm in my living room. And I'm not really comfortable with that. And so as I approached this talk this week, I thought, what's the one piece of advice I can give to PBS about navigating your way through this transition? I realized that you're the most mission-driven organization in the TV business. You see, long ago, our commercial broadcasters abdicated any sense of social responsibility. They gave up their ability to cover the news. They cored out their newsroom. This disgraceful episode with Brian Williams at NBC, that's no bad news about Brian Williams. That tells you nothing about him. He's just a stuffed shirt who reads the news. He's a newsreader. It tells you enormous volumes about what kind of degradation has happened in the newsroom as a news-gathering organization to NBC in the past and now under their current management. They've lost their way. They've lost their thread. They've lost their sense of mission and purpose. But at public television, you still have that sense of mission. Your audience knows it. They might not consciously think about it every single day. They might not even think about it when they write you a check. But I guarantee, as more and more people wake up to the fact that their trust has been stolen, has been violated, their data is being taken from them without their permission, they're going to start to have an affinity, a newfound respect for organizations that treat them with respect, organizations that don't steal their data. And I think that's a great opportunity for PBS to reassert itself as a mission-driven organization that sticks to its principles and doesn't need to deviate them because you were never ad-supported in the first place. Think about some of these things. These are some of the challenges, but within them there's opportunities. Mastering big data, it's a must. You've got to be in this space. If you're going to be in this game, you've got to understand it. Proliferation across multiple screens. Lots of challenges there, right? How do we get our content to work right? But it's not just about taking old wine and pouring it in a new bottle. Sometimes you have to completely rebuild the content. That's why I have native formats here and not interruptions. You know, when you talk to your audience, and try to engage them, you want to engage them in a way that makes sense on a mobile phone, in email, on a computer, and also, of course, on television with a telephone. You have greater precision in digital platforms. How might you use that? Stop thinking broadcast out and start thinking one-to-one conversations, one-to-many conversations, many-to-many conversations. How can you enable that? I think actually you have a reservoir of possibility around that because you're community-focused. You know, broadcasters, again, they've lost a community touch. They don't really have a connection to their local communities anymore. PBS does. That's a strong suit. That's a strong card for you in your playing hand. How can you foster communication with your local communities and really rebuild that awareness and that identity? Maybe even by getting them to come to your facility, getting them to kind of participate in the real world with PBS. You'll move from static programming, stuff that's recorded once and just replayed, to real-time, two-way communications. And to the extent that you're dealing with people in the real world and on mobile devices, location is the new cookie. It's a new way to track people. You want to figure out what's your policy around that. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to let people know that you're using those kind of location, micro-location cookies? But finally, and most importantly, is the idea, the notion of rebuilding trust. How can we reorient PBS in a digital age to that mission, that purpose, and thereby restore a sense of trust that people have? I believe that's going to be your guide, and that's going to help distinguish you from all of the other chaos that's happening out there.